My mom told me my brother was moving into my house. She didn't ask. She announced it, over pot roast, with the confidence of someone who had never once been told no by me in a way that actually stuck. And here's the shocking part. She wasn't wrong to assume that. For 34 years, I had been the person in my family who absorbed, adjusted, and accommodated. The one who was lied to quietly, cheated out of recognition openly, and shamed into silence every time I dared want something for myself. I had been backstabbed so slowly, so methodically, that I had learned to call it love. I couldn't believe how long it had taken me to see it. Here's what nobody tells you about family betrayal. It doesn't arrive like a bomb. It arrives like weather. Gradual, ambient, so normalized that you stop checking the forecast. The infidelity in my family wasn't romantic. It was structural. They were faithful to each other and consistently, quietly disloyal to me. The golden child got protected. The scapegoat got utilized. And for years, I participated in the whole system because I had never been handed the vocabulary to name what was being done to me. Until the day my mother sent me a Wayfair link for my brother's new bed, to go in my bedroom. And something inside me went very still, and very certain. What happened next is not what you'd expect. There was no screaming match, no dramatic family meeting, no ultimatum delivered over tears. Instead, I made a phone call, made a decision, and made a plan so quiet that my entire family was still texting me furniture recommendations while I was signing closing documents on a sale they knew absolutely nothing about. The truth is that the most powerful form of vengeance isn't rage, it's precision. And this is the story of how I reclaimed my dignity, my self-worth, and my entire life with a pen, a notary, and one very unforgettable Sunday dinner. They thought they'd exposed my weakness. What they revealed instead was my exit. My name is Cora. I'm 34 years old, a senior financial analyst, and I work from home in a small cottage on the outskirts of Austin, Texas. Small by suburban standards, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. But I built this life with my own 2 hands, every piece of furniture chosen with intention, every Sunday morning earned through years of late nights and silent sacrifices. People who visit always say the same thing. Cora, your place feels so peaceful. And I smile because they have no idea what I was running from when I built it. Peace wasn't a preference, it was survival. I grew up in a house where chaos wasn't just tolerated, it was the default setting. My family operated like a broken alarm that never stopped ringing, loud, disruptive, and impossible to ignore. My mom, Diane, ran the household like a CEO who never actually read the reports. She made decisions fast, loud, and without asking anyone's opinion, especially mine. My dad, Robert, was the kind of man who nodded at everything and committed to nothing, a silent king on a throne made of avoidance. And then there was my brother, Marcus. Marcus was the son the entire family orbited. He was charming in a way that made you forget he hadn't paid his own bills in 3 years. He'd walk into a room and Diane's whole face would change. Softer, brighter, like someone turned up the warmth. Meanwhile, I was the one calling the insurance company on his behalf, forwarding him job listings he never opened, and lending money I stopped expecting back. I couldn't believe how normalized it had all become. It wasn't family. It was a system. And I was the support beam holding up the whole structure. I moved out at 26, and for the first time in my life, I understood what silence actually sounded like. Not the absence of noise, the absence of obligation. I painted my walls the color I wanted. I cooked what I felt like eating. I went to bed without dreading a phone call at 11 p.m., asking for a small favor. Building that cottage wasn't just about real estate. It was about reclaiming a version of myself I hadn't met yet. A version that had opinions, boundaries, and a bedroom door that only I had a key to. But here's the thing about families like mine. They don't disappear just because you distance yourself. They adapt. They find new ways to pull you back in. And the closer you get to truly breaking free, the tighter the grip becomes. I had spent 8 years constructing my quiet little world, and I was proud of it. I was finally, genuinely at peace. What I didn't know yet was that the most audacious betrayal of my life was being planned over a pot roast on a random Sunday afternoon. I should have seen it coming. I really should have. Marcus had this gift. He could make failure sound like a plot twist in a coming-of-age movie. "I'm just between opportunities," he'd say, flashing that grin that Diane ate up like gospel. He'd been between opportunities for the better part of 4 years, but nobody in my family dared say it out loud. The word accountability wasn't in our household dictionary, but potential, oh, that word got thrown around like confetti every single time Marcus walked through the door. I watched it happen for decades, and every time, something small inside me turned to stone. I, on the other hand, had earned every single thing I had. I graduated top of my class, clawed my way through a financial firm that didn't believe in giving women promotions easily, and eventually landed a remote position that let me build my own schedule and my own life. Nobody called that potential. Nobody threw a party. When I bought my cottage, Diane's response was, "It's a bit small, don't you think?" Not congratulations. Not, "We're so proud of you." Just a critique. That was the family drama I had grown up marinating in. Marcus got applause for breathing, and I got audited for succeeding. The scapegoat dynamic is subtle at first. You almost don't notice it's happening. You tell yourself it's just personality differences, that Marcus is simply more outgoing, more lovable, easier to root for. But then you start doing the math. Who picks up the check when the family goes to dinner? Me. Who drove 4 hours to help Diane after her knee surgery while Marcus sent a "thinking of you" text? Me. Who wired money to Robert when the car broke down? Me, again. The family drama wasn't just about favoritism. It was about one child being quietly groomed to give, and the other being quietly allowed to take. What I found humiliated me more than anything was realizing how long I had accepted it. Years of being the responsible one had become years of being the invisible one. My achievements were expected, not celebrated. My limits were tested, not respected. And the cruelest part, I had internalized the whole thing. There were years I genuinely believed the problem was me, that I was too rigid, too serious, too unwilling to just help family. The betrayal wasn't just coming from them. I had been betraying my own self-worth for a very long time. But something shifts when you finally name a thing correctly. And it wasn't until I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Okafor that I first heard the term identified patient, the family member designated to hold all the responsibility while others hold none. She didn't say it to be dramatic. She said it calmly, like she was reading from a document, and something in my chest cracked open. I wasn't the reliable one. I wasn't the strong one. I was the one being used. And the scariest part, nobody in that family even realized it, because it had been working perfectly for them for 34 years. It started with the car. 3 years ago, Marcus totaled his second vehicle in 18 months and showed up at my door with a duffel bag and a smile like he was doing me a favor by visiting. "Just need to borrow yours for a couple weeks while I sort things out," he said. 6 weeks later, my car was still gone. My gas card, still linked to my account from when I'd helped him temporarily, was being used for road trips I didn't authorize, and I had to rent a vehicle just to get to my quarterly office meeting in Dallas. When I brought it up to Diane, she sighed and said, "Cora, he's going through a hard time." That sentence, that single sentence, was the key that unlocked every cage in our family's dynamic. Then came the storage situation. Marcus had been renting a studio apartment that he lost after 3 months of unpaid rent. Nobody told me the details. They just started showing up with boxes. "Just a few things," Diane said. A few things turned into my second bedroom becoming a warehouse for broken guitar equipment, a kayak he used once, and approximately 47 boxes of important stuff he couldn't explain. I started calling it the Museum of Abandoned Ambitions. Every time I tried to address it, the guilt trip arrived before I could finish my sentence. Family helps family, Cora. 5 words designed to make self-worth feel like selfishness. The money piece was where it got truly suffocating. It wasn't big dramatic loans. It was the slow bleed of small amounts that never got paid back. $40 here, $120 there. A shared subscription I temporarily covered that somehow renewed for 2 years. Marcus never asked with urgency. He asked with ease, like it was a formality. Like, of course, I'd say yes because I always did. And the worst part was that every time I handed it over, I felt a strange mix of resentment and relief. Resentment because I knew it was wrong, and relief because saying no meant a family crisis I wasn't ready to survive. The thing about being backstabbed slowly is that there's no single moment you can point to and say, there, that's when it happened. It's 1,000 tiny cuts disguised as family loyalty. Marcus had learned early that I was the soft place to land, not because I was weak, but because I had been trained to absorb. Every boundary I tried to set got reframed as a betrayal. Every time I said, I need some space, Diane found a way to turn it into a guilt sermon. The family drama had its own gravity, and I had been orbiting it for so long I'd forgotten I had the ability to leave the atmosphere entirely. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have predicted, was that all of these small invasions were just rehearsals. The car, the boxes, the money, the guilt. They were all warm-ups for the main event. The thing my family was building toward, slowly and without telling me, was so much bigger than a borrowed car or a storage fee. They were building toward taking the one thing I had left, the place that was entirely, unapologetically mine. And they were going to do it over Sunday dinner, with pot roast on the table and smiles on their faces, like it was the most natural thing in the world. That Sunday started like most of them did. Diane's voice on the phone at 9 a.m, cheerful in a way that always meant she wanted something. Come for dinner, sweetheart. I'm making your favorite. Pot roast. She only made pot roast when she needed the atmosphere to be soft, warm, and disarming. I should have known then. I should have walked in with armor instead of an empty stomach. But I drove the 40 minutes to my parents' house in San Marcos with the windows down, genuinely believing it was just dinner. That's the thing about being lied to by people you love. You keep giving them the benefit of the doubt long after they've stopped deserving it. The table was set beautifully. Robert was in a good mood, which was unusual. Marcus was there, dressed better than normal, which was also unusual. The conversation was light, too light, like everyone was holding their breath and just waiting. We talked about the weather in Texas, about a neighbor's new fence, about a TV show nobody actually watched. And then, between the second helping and the bread basket, Diane set down her fork, folded her hands, and looked at me with that specific expression she reserves for announcements that aren't actually announcements. They're verdicts. Cora, she said, we've been thinking. We. That word, not I, not your father and I decided together after real conversation. We, as in the family unit that had already voted and I wasn't in the room. Marcus needs a fresh start. He's been struggling and you know how much he needs stability right now. I nodded, still not seeing where this was going, still chewing my pot roast like a fool. You work from home, you have that extra room, and it just makes sense for him to stay with you for a few months while he gets back on his feet. The table went quiet. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There was no, would you be open to? There was no, what do you think? It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. A business decision made by a board I didn't know I was a member of, about an asset they had apparently already decided belonged to the family. My cottage, my sanctuary, the place I had bled for, the space I had built as a monument to my own self-worth, had been assigned a new purpose without my knowledge, without my consent, and without a single moment of hesitation. The shaming came later. In that moment, there was just silence and the sound of a fork scraping china. I looked at Marcus. He was cutting his meat like the conversation was already over, like it was settled. He didn't look up immediately, but when he did, there was this flicker, just a flicker, of entitlement in his eyes. Not gratitude, not apology, entitlement. And that flicker, right there at that dinner table in San Marcos, was the moment everything changed for me. Not because I screamed. Not because I cried, but because something very cold and very clear settled into my chest, and I thought, not this time. I drove home in silence that night. No music, no podcasts, just the hum of the highway and the sound of my own breathing. I never agreed to anything at that table. I just stopped correcting their assumptions, and in my family's language, that was close enough to a green light. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I already had 2 texts from Diane. The first was a link to a bed frame on Wayfair. The second was a list of Marcus's dietary preferences, as if I were a hotel he'd already booked, and all that was left was the check-in date. I stared at my phone in the dark of my car and felt the most specific kind of humiliated. The kind that comes from realizing people who love you have never actually seen you. The next morning, it escalated. Diane called to coordinate logistics, her words. She wanted to know if Marcus could have the room facing the garden because it would be better for his creativity. She asked whether I had a standing desk she could borrow for him. She suggested casually that since Marcus was a night owl, maybe I could adjust my work schedule slightly so our routines wouldn't clash. I sat at my actual work desk, in my actual home, listening to my mother redesign my life in real time, and I felt something that wasn't quite anger. It was more like clarity, the cold, surgical kind. I was being cheated out of my own home before Marcus had even packed a bag. Then Marcus called. He was breezy about it, almost excited, which was more disturbing than anything. "Hey, so I was thinking about the living room layout," he said, like we'd already had a completely different conversation than the one that actually happened. "The TV placement is a little off. I think if we move the couch to the left wall..." I stopped him mid-sentence. "Marcus, nothing has been decided," I said. He paused for a beat, then laughed, that easy, dismissive laugh he'd used on me since childhood. "Come on, Cora. Mom already sorted it out." Mom already sorted it out. My home, my furniture, my life. Already sorted. What was happening wasn't a favor being asked. It was a territory being claimed. The family drama had evolved. It had gone from borrowing and imposing to full annexation, and they were doing it with the confidence of people who had never once been told no by me in a way that actually stuck. The betrayal wasn't dramatic. It was logistical. They weren't shouting at me. They were scheduling over me. And that, I realized, was so much worse. Because it meant they weren't afraid of my reaction. They genuinely didn't expect one. I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter, walked to my garden window, and looked out at the yard I had planted myself, the lavender along the fence, the rosemary by the gate, the small patch of grass where I drank my coffee on Saturday mornings. And for the first time, I didn't feel sad. I felt something that was almost strategic, like a chess player who's been playing defense for 30 years and just realized she's actually been in a position to win for a very long time. I needed to think, and I needed to make a phone call, but not to anyone in my family. Her name was Sophie, and she'd been my closest friend since her law school orientation and my first week in the finance program. Same campus, same terrible coffee machine. Sophie was the kind of woman who didn't sugarcoat anything but somehow made the truth feel like a gift. She'd been watching my family dynamics from a safe distance for years, offering commentary the way a sports analyst offers play-by-play, calm, specific, and devastatingly accurate. When I called her that Monday morning and told her everything, the dinner, the Wayfair link, the furniture rearrangement, Marcus's phone call, she didn't gasp. She just said quietly, "Cora, this is parasitic." She said it without dramatics, and that made it land harder. What you're describing isn't a family asking for help. It's a system extracting resources from the one person who never learned to say no effectively. I wanted to push back, to defend them out of habit, but she kept going. Every time you've given a soft no and then caved, you've trained them that soft no's are just the opening bid of a negotiation. They don't hear no, Cora. They hear try again. When I sat in my kitchen with my coffee going cold and felt the truth of it settle into my bones. I had been lied to, not by their words, but by the structure itself. And I had participated in the lie for decades. So, what do I do? I asked. Sophie paused, and when Sophie pauses, you pay attention. You need a limit that cannot be negotiated, she said. Not a conversation, not a boundary discussion, not a family meeting with feelings and apologies. An irreversible fact, something that exists in the real world that no amount of guilt or pressure can undo. Because I knew if I just said no, they'd turn it into a trial. Weeks of calls, guilt, triangulation, until my no quietly became a fine. I wrote it down anyway. An irreversible fact. I didn't know exactly what that meant yet, but something in my chest recognized it immediately, the way your body recognizes a key that fits before your brain has finished processing the lock. We talked for 2 hours that day. Sophie walked me through everything. My legal rights as a property owner, the fact that no verbal family agreement held any weight, the reality that Marcus had zero claim to my home regardless of what Diane had sorted out. She also said something that I keep coming back to. The problem with people who've been scapegoated their whole lives is that they think justice means getting the family to finally understand. It doesn't. Justice means you stop needing them to. I couldn't believe how much that one sentence rearranged something in me. Karma, in that moment, stopped feeling like something that happened to people and started feeling like something I could engineer. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my cottage for a long time. My lavender was in full bloom outside the window. My coffee was cold. My mind was faster than it had been in years. Sophie had given me something my family had spent decades trying to take: clarity. And with clarity came a plan. Not a plan born from anger, not from revenge in the dramatic sense, but from something more powerful. The decision to finally, completely, irrevocably choose myself. The details started forming slowly at first, then all at once. And the first step didn't involve a single conversation with my family. The first thing I did was change my phone settings. I didn't block anyone. That would have set off alarms. Instead, I set a custom notification filter. No pings, no banners, everything archived. And routed Diane, Robert, and Marcus to a folder I checked once a day, at a time of my choosing, with a cup of tea and my full emotional armor on. Every message was documented, screenshotted, and saved to a folder Sophie told me to keep. You don't know what you'll need as a record, she said. She was right. Within 48 hours, I had texts from Diane discussing Marcus's move-in date, from Marcus asking about parking for his stuff, and from Robert forwarding a storage rental comparison he'd done for my home, without mentioning it to me. The paper trail was building itself. Next came the room. My second bedroom had been used as Marcus's personal storage unit for the better part of 2 years. Boxes, equipment, a bike he'd left there temporarily 16 months ago. One afternoon, while Diane thought I was coming around to the idea, I quietly, methodically, began moving his items into labeled boxes near the front door. Not thrown out, not damaged. Labeled, organized, and ready for pickup. When Marcus called that week, I told him he needed to collect his belongings. He laughed it off. I said, "This isn't a suggestion." He stopped laughing. Small wins, but they mattered. Because they reminded me that I had a voice, and that when I used it clearly, it worked. Then I called a real estate agent named Dawn, who had sold 2 properties on my street and knew the Austin market the way a sommelier knows wine, with confidence and zero hesitation. The market's still strong in your area, he told me at the kitchen table, with comparable sales spread in front of us. Off-market, you could move this in 2 weeks if the price is right. Off-market, no sign, No public listing, no open houses. 2 weeks. I looked around at my lavender curtains, my overflowing bookshelves, my hand-painted backsplash tiles, and I felt grief, yes, but I felt something sharper underneath it. Intention. I signed the listing agreement that afternoon. My family didn't know. They were still texting me Wayfair links. I found a storage unit 12 miles away and started making quiet trips. 3 boxes at a time, always on weekday mornings when nobody would think to check. Showings happened the same way. Midday, weekday only, while my family was at work and had no reason to drive past my street. I packed only what truly mattered: documents, heirlooms, my grandmother's quilt, the paintings I'd collected over 8 years. Everything else I either sold online or left staged for the showing. It felt surreal, moving out of my own home in slow motion while simultaneously having phone conversations with Diane about Marcus's adjustment period. But the dissonance was useful. It kept me sharp, kept me focused. Every box I taped shut felt like a quiet decoration of independence. Dawn brought buyers within 10 days. A young couple from Chicago relocating for work. Pre-approved, enthusiastic, no contingencies. They walked through my cottage on a Tuesday morning and made an offer by Tuesday afternoon. I sat in the signing office 2 days later, pen in hand, looking at the closing documents, and I thought about every Sunday dinner that had made me smaller, every family helps family that had drained me, every version of myself I'd abandoned to keep the peace. Then I signed. Each signature felt like cutting a cord I hadn't known I was tangled in. Vengeance doesn't always look like a scene. Sometimes it looks like a notarized document. Closing day was a Thursday, and I wore the yellow blouse I'd bought the morning I got my first promotion, the one Diane had said was too bold for a meeting. The notary's office was quiet, clinical, and perfect. Dawn was there. The buyers were there, practically vibrating with excitement over their new home. And I was there, in my yellow blouse, pen moving steadily through every line, every initial, every signature. Each one landed with a weight I hadn't expected. Not grief, not loss, but the specific physical sensation of a chain coming loose. I had been financially and emotionally tethered to a version of myself that existed to be useful to others, and I was cutting that tether one signature at a time. The truth is, I had loved that cottage. I want to be honest about that, because this isn't a story about not caring. It's a story about caring more about self-worth than about square footage. I had loved the lavender by the fence, the sound of rain on that particular roof, the kitchen where I'd cooked my first real dinner party. But I loved myself more. Or rather, I was learning to. And sometimes the most radical act of self-reclaiming is releasing the thing you built in order to prevent it from becoming someone else's leverage. That cottage had been my sanctuary. It could not be allowed to become my cage. What struck me most, sitting in that office, was how simple it felt once the decision was made. I had spent years tangled in the complexity of family obligation, the guilt, the loyalty, the but their family logic that overrides basic dignity. And yet here, in a beige office on a Thursday morning in Austin, the actual mechanics of reclaiming my life took about 90 minutes and a working pen. The family drama that had consumed decades of my energy came down to this. I had legal ownership of something. I chose to exercise that ownership. They had no role in it and no recourse. Justice, it turned out, wasn't emotional. It was transactional. And I was finally the one making the transaction. I moved into my new apartment that same week. It was a third-floor unit in a building in a neighborhood my family didn't know, in a city they rarely visited, with a lease in only my name and a buzzer that required my approval to open. The furniture was minimal. I'd sold most of the cottage pieces and started fresh. A new bed, new shelves, 2 good kitchen knives, a coffee machine that made exactly 1 cup at a time. Diane had texted that morning asking if I'd looked into getting Marcus a key cut. I read the message, set my phone down, and hung a painting on my new living room wall. The nail went in clean on the first try. I took that as a sign. There is a specific kind of peace that comes not from the absence of conflict, but from the knowledge that you have already moved beyond it. I wasn't hiding. I was simply no longer available in the way I used to be. The payback I was building wasn't theatrical. There would be no screaming, no confrontation scene, no tearful speech where I listed every grievance since 1997. There would simply be a Sunday dinner, one last one, where I would sit across from my family and let them believe everything was going according to their plan. And then I would say 2 sentences that would rearrange their entire reality. I was already looking forward to the pot roast. The invitation came on a Wednesday. A text from Diane. Dinner Sunday 5 p.m. Marcus is so excited, Cora. This is going to be so good for him. I stared at those words for a long time. So good for him. Not, thank you. Not, we appreciate you. Not even the pretense of it being mutual. Just, this is good for Marcus, and therefore it is good, full stop. I typed back, I'll be there. 3 words, no punctuation, and I set my phone face down. Sophie texted 5 minutes later. You sure about this? I replied with 1 word. Absolutely. The silence from me that week had apparently been interpreted by my family as sulking, as the classic Cora pattern of withdrawing, cooling down, and then quietly re-entering orbit. Diane told me this later, almost proudly. I knew you just needed a few days to process. She had told Marcus he could bring a few boxes over the following Saturday. She had, I would find out, already told her friends that Marcus was getting a fresh start at his sister's. The narrative had been written, rehearsed, and shared before I had ever confirmed a single detail. That was the shocking part. Not the presumption, I expected that, but the completeness of it. They hadn't been negotiating with me. They had been waiting for me to catch up to a decision they'd already made. I spent Saturday doing ordinary things. I went to the farmer's market. I had lunch with Sophie, who went over everything one final time and reminded me to stay calm, stay brief, and let the facts do the work. I drove past my old street once, not out of sentimentality, but because I needed to feel the distance between who I used to be and who I was walking into that dinner as. The cottage looked beautiful from the street. The new owners had already put a small potted plant by the door. I smiled, genuinely. Good. That place deserved people who chose it intentionally. Sunday arrived the way all pivotal days do, looking completely ordinary. I wore something comfortable. I drove to San Marcos with music on this time. The playlist I made the morning I moved into the cottage at 26, the one that made me feel like I was the main character in my own story for the first time. I was calm. Not performed calm, not white-knuckle calm, genuinely, biologically calm, in the way you can only be when you've already made the decision and all that's left is the delivery. My family was about to experience something they had never once in my lifetime experienced from me. An absolutely irreversible consequence. I pulled into my parents' driveway and sat in my car for exactly 2 minutes. I could see the kitchen light through the window, Diane moving around, the warm glow of a family dinner that had no idea it was about to be the last of its kind. Marcus's truck was already there. Robert's car. The scene was so familiar it almost hurt. Almost. I took one slow breath, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, and said one thing to myself before opening the car door. Something small, quiet, and entirely true. Then I walked inside. Dinner was almost pleasant, which made it stranger. Diane had made pot roast again. I noticed the pattern now, the way she weaponized comfort food as emotional lubricant. Robert talked about a fishing trip. Marcus was in high spirits, already speaking about his room with the possessive ease of someone who had already mentally moved in. He described his plans for the space: a standing desk, a reading corner, maybe a pull-up bar in the doorway if Cora didn't mind. He was already editing my home in past tense, and nobody at the table seemed to find that remarkable. I watched it all with a strange, clean detachment, the way you watch a movie you've already seen the ending of. Diane brought it up formally over dessert. She set down her spoon, smiled at me with that particular warmth she reserves for moments when she thinks she's won, and said, "So, Saturday. Marcus thinks the morning works better for the truck. Does that work for you, sweetheart?" The table leaned in slightly, the way people lean in when they think the answer is already known. Marcus was looking at his plate. Robert was nodding at nothing. And I nodded once, calmly, and said, "Sure, Saturday works fine." Diane exhaled. Marcus smiled. Robert said, "Good, good." A beat passed. 2 beats. Then I set down my own fork and added quietly, "He's welcome to move in Saturday, if the new owners don't mind." The silence that followed was unlike any silence I have ever heard in that house. And that house had produced a lot of silences. This one was different. It had texture. It had weight. It lasted approximately 4 seconds, which felt like standing at the edge of something enormous. Then Diane said, "What?" Not sharply. Almost softly, the way people say it when the sentence they heard cannot possibly be the sentence that was spoken. "I sold the house," I said. "Closed last Thursday. The handover is this week." I watched the words land on each of them in sequence. Diane's face going from confusion to something close to shock, Marcus's fork stopping midair, Robert sitting very still. What followed was not quiet. Diane's voice went up 2 full octaves. You sold it? Without telling us?" She used the word us, and in that word was the entire architecture of what I had been living inside for 34 years. The idea that my property was somehow a family asset, that my decisions required their approval, that I was a resource, not a person. Marcus found his voice next. "That's incredibly selfish, Cora. I needed that space. Not, I'm shocked. Not, I'm sorry I put you in this position. Just, you were supposed to be useful, and you failed at it." I couldn't believe how clearly he was showing me everything. It was almost generous of him. Robert tried to regain control the way he always did, by asking a practical question. "Well, where are you living now?" And I looked at him with the most honest expression I had given anyone in that family in years, and I said, "Somewhere comfortable." He asked for the address. I shook my head once. He asked about a spare key. I said I didn't have one to give. Diane was still talking, about betrayal, about family, about how she couldn't believe I would do this. But her words were starting to sound like weather, like something happening outside, at a distance, that I was watching through glass. I stayed for 12 more minutes, finished my tea, and said goodnight with a calmness that I think frightened them more than any argument ever could. The call started before I reached the highway. Diane first, twice, then Marcus, then a joint call that I assume was them in the same room. I let them all go to the folder. I had promised myself I wouldn't engage in the heat of it, not because I was afraid of the conversation, but because I had learned from Sophie that a reaction was what they needed. A reaction meant I was still inside the system, still a participant in the negotiation. My silence wasn't passive. It was the most active thing I had ever done in that family. Every unanswered call was a boundary. Every unread text was a consequence. This was the payback. Not loud, not theatrical, just permanent. Over the next week, the messages went through predictable phases. Anger first, Diane calling it a betrayal, Marcus calling it unbelievably cruel, Robert sending a single text that said, "This has gone too far." Then came the guilt phase, which was more sophisticated. References to everything the family had done for me over the years. A sudden inventory of sacrifices I apparently hadn't properly acknowledged. It was almost fascinating to witness from the outside. The family drama was playing out exactly as Sophie had predicted. Beat for beat, like a script they'd been running on other people for years and were only now discovering didn't work on me anymore. The shaming attempts were particularly creative. Diane told a mutual family friend that I had abandoned the family. Marcus apparently called me vindictive to at least 2 cousins. I heard all of this secondhand and felt almost nothing, which was itself a revelation. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly the real consequence of Marcus's situation would reveal itself. Without my cottage as an option, the few months plan collapsed. Marcus had no job, no savings, and no other family member with the available space or the insufficient spine to absorb him. Within 2 weeks, he had moved back into my parents' house. Temporarily, Diane said. Karma has a dry sense of humor. The golden child, the one whose comfort had been the organizing principle of our family system for 30 years, was now sleeping in his childhood bedroom while Diane had to manage his dietary preferences, his schedule conflicts, his abandoned projects, and his general resistance to accountability. All things she had previously been very happy to redirect to me. I heard updates through a cousin I trusted. Apparently, Marcus's temporary stay was already generating friction. Robert, who had spent decades staying out of things, was now apparently living inside a thing he could not escape. Diane, who had positioned herself as the family's CEO, was now discovering what it felt like to actually manage the person she'd been protecting. I didn't feel glee about this exactly, but I felt something honest, something like justice settling into the correct shape. The family drama had redistributed itself to where it actually belonged, and I was no longer in the building. My new apartment was quiet on a Tuesday morning in a way that made me stop and just stand in the kitchen for a moment, holding my coffee, listening to absolutely nothing. No guilt, no obligation, no pending emotional labor, just my own breathing, my own schedule, my own life. I had reclaimed something that I hadn't even fully understood I'd lost. Not just a home, a self. The version of Cora that existed before she learned to make herself small enough to keep everyone else comfortable. She was back. She was drinking good coffee. She was not available for comment. People ask sometimes, usually people who've grown up in healthy families, bless them, don't you miss them? And the honest answer is, I miss the family I wished I had. I miss the version of Diane that could have been proud of me without needing to diminish me. I miss the version of Marcus that could have grown into something without needing to take from me. I miss the dinners that could have been warm and reciprocal and real. But those families don't exist. They're the ones we grieve when we finally stop pretending. What I don't miss is the wait. And the wait, it turns out, was most of it. My new apartment was in a neighborhood I had chosen entirely for myself. Good coffee shop on the corner, a park 2 blocks east, a neighbor I'd nodded to twice but never introduced myself to. Nobody in my family knew the address. Not the building, not the street, not the neighborhood. And I want to be clear that this wasn't cruelty. It was architecture. I was building a life where my safety wasn't contingent on other people's emotional management. Where my space couldn't be pre-assigned by someone else's logistics planning. Where family helps family would have to mean something mutual, or it would mean nothing at all. Marcus living with my parents was, as Sophie put it, the most honest version of the situation finally expressing itself. He was the golden child. Let the household that had gilded him figure out how to live with the result. The last update I received was that he had rearranged the living room furniture without asking, had 3 business ideas in development, and had told Diane that her cooking schedule wasn't working for his energy levels. The vengeance I had enacted wasn't designed to punish him specifically. It was designed to remove myself from the equation. But the consequence, playing out in that San Marcos house, felt like the universe doing the administrative work. I started running again. I'd stopped years earlier. Too tired, too scheduled, too much energy going outward instead of in. Now I ran in the mornings before my first call. Through the park, past the coffee shop, past the kind of ordinary life I'd been deferring for years. I started cooking things I'd never had time to cook. I called friends I'd been too busy to see. I took a long weekend to the Texas Hill Country alone, just because I could. The reclaiming of a self isn't dramatic when it finally arrives. It's quiet and incremental, like the body remembering something it had almost forgotten. It tastes like freedom, and it sounds like your own voice, unhurried, with no one waiting on the other end to redirect it. The thing I think about most, when I think about all of it, is this. The betrayal wasn't the pot roast dinner. It wasn't Marcus and the furniture rearrangement. It wasn't even the audacity of a Wayfair link. The real betrayal had been happening for decades, quietly and with my participation. And the real justice, the deepest form of payback, wasn't selling the house. It was this: a Tuesday morning, a cup of coffee, a kitchen that no one else had a key to. That, right there, was the most shocking thing that had ever happened to me. I had become someone I actually wanted to be. After everything, I genuinely hadn't seen that coming. The email arrived on a Monday, 6 weeks after the dinner. It was from Robert, which surprised me because Robert communicated by text, by nod, and by absence. An email meant he had thought about it, drafted it, revised it, probably. The subject line was, "Cora, we should talk." No exclamation point, which was notable. I opened it with my second coffee of the morning, sitting cross-legged on my new couch, with the kind of emotional distance that only comes from having genuinely moved on. The email was 3 paragraphs long. It covered how much the family missed me, how Marcus was adjusting, the word adjusting doing extraordinary heavy lifting, and how he hoped I would reconsider my position on maintaining contact. There were 2 things notably absent from the email. 1 was an apology. 2 was any acknowledgement that what my family had attempted, pre-assigning my home, ignoring my autonomy, treating my property as a shared family resource, was wrong. The email read less like an olive branch and more like a subpoena. "We want you back in your previous role, and we're framing the invitation as warmth." I read it twice. Then I sat for a moment and did something I hadn't done in years. I listened to what I actually felt, rather than what I was supposed to feel. And what I actually felt was nothing that required a response. Sophie had warned me about this moment. "There will be a test," she said. "Not a dramatic one, a quiet one. Someone will reach out in a way that feels almost reasonable, almost warm, almost like the beginning of something better. And you'll want to respond, because you're human and you love them, and hope is a very powerful thing. But ask yourself first, has anything actually changed? Or is this just the system recalibrating, trying to find a new way to pull you back in?" I thought about that as I reread Robert's email. Had anything changed? Diane hadn't apologized. Marcus hadn't acknowledged a single thing. Robert was reaching out, and in doing so, was asking me to re-enter the orbit. The answer, when I phrased it that way, was very simple. For a second, my thumb hovered over the keyboard. Old Cora, trained to fix things, trained to reply, to smooth it over, to keep the peace. Then I exhaled. I deleted the email, not with anger, not with a sense of performance, just a clean, intentional deletion, the way you clear your desktop when it's gotten cluttered. I didn't draft a response. I didn't send a one-liner. I didn't consult anyone or second-guess myself for 3 days. I deleted it and made breakfast. Eggs, sourdough toast, a glass of orange juice. I ate at my kitchen table with the window open and the sounds of my neighborhood coming through. A dog somewhere, a car, someone laughing on the street below. Ordinary sounds, extraordinary peace. This is where the story could have a dramatic final scene. A confrontation, a tearful resolution, a family reckoning. But the truth is that real liberation doesn't usually announce itself. It arrives in small, undramatic moments that accumulate into a life. A deleted email, a morning run, a kitchen with no extra keys, a Sunday that belongs entirely to you. The betrayal was real. The backstabbing was real. The family drama was decades long and deeply carved. But the payback, the real payback, the kind that lasts, was this. I stopped needing it to end differently. And the moment I stopped needing that, the story did what all good stories eventually do. It got quiet. And in the quiet, finally, I could hear myself. So, here we are. The pot roast is gone. The house has new owners. The emails stay deleted. And somewhere in San Marcos, Texas, a very golden child is rearranging his parents' furniture and wondering why his sister won't answer the phone. I want to ask you something. And I mean this seriously, not rhetorically. Have you ever been the support beam? The one who shows up, absorbs, delivers, and receives nothing but expectations in return? Have you ever had your self-worth quietly carved out of you by people who called it family? Have you ever been so backstabbed by people you loved that you didn't even feel the blade because you were too busy being useful to notice the bleeding? If any part of this story hits somewhere true, I want to hear about it. Drop your story in the comments below. Tell me who the golden child was in your family. Tell me about the moment you finally chose yourself. Tell me about your pot roast dinner, your selling the house moment, your deleted email. Your story matters here. And this community is built for people who have lived inside the kind of family drama that most people are too polite to admit exists. Because here's what I believe. There is a specific kind of justice that has nothing to do with courts or confrontations. It's the justice of a Tuesday morning that belongs entirely to you. And if you're somewhere in the middle of your own story right now, still holding boxes, still answering every call, still waiting for them to finally see you, I want you to know that the exit exists. Sophie showed me mine. Maybe this video is yours. If this story made you think, made you feel, or made you remember something you've been trying to forget, subscribe. Hit the bell. Because this channel is where we talk about the things families don't put in the group chat, the betrayal, the reclaiming, the real cost of dignity, and what payback actually looks like when it's done with intelligence instead of impulse. There's more where this came from. And the next one, it's going to make this look like a warm-up. See you there.